Welcome to Fruity Knitting. I'm Madeline.
And I'm Andrea.
And this is episode 154. For new viewers, Fruity Knitting is a 90-minute program that brings you knitting inspiration from around the world, as well as some extra snippets of travel, history, and storytelling that we hope adds joy to your life and brings a smile to your face.
And we have two stellar interview guests in our program today. Our main feature interview is with the designer and avid crafter Tanis Gray. So Tanis was a regular guest on PBS Knitting Daily Television. She's served as yarn editor for Vogue Knitting, and she's an award-winning author of 16 knitting books. And Tanis has also collaborated on books with Warner Brothers, Disney, Lucasfilms, and Tim Burton. She has an incredible CV. And for her designing, she draws inspiration from stories. So she's designing pieces that are based on movie and book characters. And I know that's going to really appeal to a lot of the nerds in our audience. And over the last 6 years, she's actually published 7 movie-themed knitting books. And we've got some of them here. There's 2 that she's done on Harry Potter. We don't have those. There's Knitting with Disney. There's one based on Star Wars. And then Lord of the Rings. And this one is Nightmare Before Christmas, which is based on the Tim Burton movie. And the last one that she's done, her latest one, which we don't have as well, is based on the Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
So this interview is a must-watch for all the knitters who are also super fans of these iconic movies or television series, because Tanis shares insights about her collaboration with Warner Brothers and Disney, the in-depth research that she has to do, and how she aims to truly capture the essence of all of these beloved characters. And being a super fan herself, Tanis brings a lot of passion to her work. So if you're a super fan or you know someone who is, even if they're not a knitter, invite them to watch along with you. And if you're not a super fan, there's still plenty to appreciate because Tanis is very insightful about knitting. She's an excellent speaker, which always makes for a good interview. And she also takes us through some really innovative knitting techniques.
Yeah, so Mum interviewed Tanis during our trip to the Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival last year. And then a month ago in April, we visited the Swiss Yarn Festival, where I interviewed the embroiderer Manuela Thüler. So Manuela is from Bern in Switzerland. She's very passionate about Japanese textiles and craft traditions, and her own work centers around mindfulness and freeform embroidery. So in our conversation, she describes her approach to embroidery as very spontaneous and intuitive. And she also encourages other makers like us knitters to not always fully plan ahead with a project, but to stay curious and allow our work to evolve organically. So at the time, she was teaching classes at the Swiss Yarn Festival, and she does like to invite her students to tell their personal stories through their generally freeform embroidery. So I think that's really cool. Also, I have made progress on the Vader-und-Feld sweater. This started as a boyfriend sweater and has since become a fiancé sweater for my fiancé Ryan. And I think that just shows how long I've been working on this project.
Actually, if she doesn't hurry up and finish it, it's soon going to become a husband sweater.
I know. I better hurry up. Also, I prepared a short tutorial for you on a grafting technique that we haven't previously shown you on the podcast. So I tried it for the first time on this sweater. I had a lot of success with it, so I think you will really enjoy it. And Mum has made progress on my wedding veil, so I think we should start with Mum in under construction.
Ah, yes, here it is. So I have made some progress since the last
you've made a lot.
episode. I just blocked this tiny bit so you can see the pattern a little bit clearly.
Yeah.
So there it is there. But first of all, I want to show you a photo of what I'm aspiring to. This gorgeous wedding shawl was created by the Dutch lace designer Monique from A Passion for Lace, and it's called The 12th of Never, after the song about eternal love, which of course makes it perfect for a wedding. So the shawl is very large and it's shaped like a semicircle. Along the straight edge, there's 2 rows of love hearts, and the curved hem is finished with a very pretty diamond pattern. And in the last episode, I had just started knitting the diamond edge and had done about 5 pattern repeats when I showed it to you. So like I said, I've This section here I've done a rough blocking on so you can see the pattern a little bit more clearly, and this section's a little bit crumpled like lace normally is. So one of the standout features of Madeline's wedding dress, which I think I've told you is not going to be white, is the extremely elegant cut of the back. It's really, really beautiful. And because that feature is so important, she's going to wear her very long hair styled up, maybe at the back of her head or on the nape of her neck, just so that the back of the dress is really clearly visible. And likewise, I want this veil to be very sheer so that you can see the back of the dress through this as well. So I am using an ultra fine cobweb weight yarn in 100% cashmere, and this colour is called Ecru. And the lace pattern, as you can see, is very sheer. You can see right through it with the hearts as well. So it's very open and it's perfect for this. However, if the veil is too wide, when it falls down her back, there's going to be folds. And then that's, 2 or 3 layers, and that could obscure the back of the dress. And that's what I really want to avoid. So this is a rough sketch of how the veil is shaped. The heart motifs runs along the straight edge and the diamond pattern curves around the outer edge. The mesh fills in the center. So for the measurements, the diameter is roughly 150 centimeters, the radius is 75 centimeters, and the outer curved edge of the semicircle, so the arch, is roughly 235 centimeters long. So you start by knitting the diamond pattern sideways as one long strip, and once that's done, you pick up stitches along the inner edge of that strip, so not the outer decorative kind of pointy edge, but the straight edge. And from there, you begin each row with the heart pattern on the right, then you work across the mesh section in the middle, and you finish again with the heart pattern on the left. And as you go, you decrease on both sides, right where the heart and the mesh sections meet, and you're decreasing on every second row. And that shaping is actually what forms a semicircle. So if you picture it, you've got the heart pattern on both sides, and as you keep decreasing it, it actually makes them end up like this, and then you graft them together right at the end. So you'll have hearts in one direction and hearts in the other direction, and then they meet in the middle, and it's a grafted edge. So they go right across the straight edge of the semicircle, and the middle of the straight edge of the semicircle is going to sit here on Madeline's head, and then the rest of the semicircle is going to fall down her back. Okay, now the arch is very long. It's 235 centimeters long, roughly. So that makes it really wide. And as I've just said, that's what I started to get really nervous about, that there'll be a lot of folds and then you're not going to see the back of this gorgeous dress. So when I was knitting that first long strip of diamond pattern, I was about halfway through, and in total there's about 80 pattern repeats, and I think I'd got to about 45 pattern repeats. And then I started thinking, oh my goodness, this is really quite wide already. And I wasn't motivated by doing less knitting, just to let you know. But when I thought that, I thought, I wonder if we can change the shape of the shawl. But the challenge for that is you want to have the length. So you want to keep the length but not have it so wide. And if you go back to thinking of your semicircle again, the length is from the middle of the straight edge straight down. We need it to be long because it's going from the top of Madeline's head to halfway down her hip. So that can't change. So then I started to think, okay, what about the shape of a very large bell? So wide and curved at the bottom, with the longer section sort of in the middle, gradually tapering in, and then narrower and curved at the top. So that's sort of like the shape of a big bell. So thinking about this for quite a few days and feeling rather cheeky, I actually contacted Monique and asked her what she thought of this idea. Would it be possible to change the shape of the shawl into this kind of shape by delaying the decreases that are at the sides between the mesh and the heart section? And being the incredibly kind and generous and talented person that she is, she said, give me a day and I'll rework the maths for you. So here's what Monique came up with. After picking up the stitches along the inside edge of the diamond strip, I would start working the heart and the mesh sections without doing any decreases at first for at least 20 centimetres, but I think I'll probably do at least 30 centimetres. And then after that, I would begin to gradually decrease at the sides, and that would gently narrow the veil, bringing the hearts closer together and causing the diamond edge to start curving upwards and around at the sides. So we might actually need to rethink how to finish the top edge, because there is a chance that it'll end up with a slightly 3D shape, almost like a soft hoodie. But honestly, I think that could actually work, because Madeleine has so much hair. If you think about it, when it's kind of piled at the back of your head, having the veil as a soft hoodie around it could look like a bit of a hairnet that starts here and then sort of comes down with just a few little folds right at the base around your hips. So it could actually work. So a huge thank you to Monique for your generosity and your talent. I do have to say that this has been quite a challenging project for me, mainly because of the time pressure. I'm really not getting much knitting time. I might get 1 hour a day in, but it's usually in the evenings. I start maybe at 8 o'clock at night. Sometimes I get 2 hours in. Some days I get nothing in. So I feel a lot of time pressure to get this finished and not to make mistakes. That's a real difficulty. So these heart patterns here, I actually swatched them multiple times in some other yarn first, because I kept getting different stitch counts. And so I swatched them so that I could at least do 2 or 3 hearts in a row without any mistakes. And I thoroughly understood the pattern, because it's really...
you don't want to have to undo it.
You can't, if you won't recognise that you've got a mistake until maybe 4 rows up. And then you have to back pedal for all of these stitches for every row. And what's really challenging about working with incredibly fine yarn is that it turns in, each stitch will in the row below will turn into like a knot, and it's even hard to even open that up to get your needle in to pick up the stitch from the previous row if you're backpedaling. It's crazy. I have been using lifelines. Normally what I do is thread in some dental floss through the hole in my interchangeable needles, but these are very fine and dental floss doesn't fit through. So I've been using sewing thread. You can maybe see a little line of red sewing thread there. But nevertheless, I'm still making mistakes, which is really quite disheartening.
There's another little line in there as well.
I'm about to tell them that. They've probably already spotted it. Anyway, the thing is, right, you can see this line across here. Don't look too closely, or pretend you can't see it for me. That would feel nice. The problem is, this is easy. The mesh section is actually easy. There's a ton of knit threes together, which are impossible to back pick. Like, you just do not want to do that. But I noticed that I did this 2 rows of stocking stitch here, but I didn't notice it until it was further down in my knitting, because when it's all bunched up on your needles, you can't actually see it, and I didn't look super closely before I pulled out of my lifeline. And then when I saw it, I thought, there's no way I'm backpedaling right down there. That would take me a few days at least, and I don't have time for that. So it is a bit disheartening, but bless Madeleine, she's been incredibly gracious and sweet and calling all of my mistakes design features.
Yeah, design features are fine, but I prefer not to have too many design features.
I'm trying to do my best under the time pressure.
Yeah. Look, I think it's still very beautiful. I'm really excited to be wearing it. We had a little go on what it would look like over my hair, and I think it's going to be gorgeous, design features and all.
Maybe I should have kept the width, because you can see if it's really bunched up like that, you can't see any of the mistakes. And if you just sort of walk very fast,
it'll be good. No, we were laughing because I think I'm going to look a bit old-fashioned, but that's exactly what I like.
The dress is kind of very elegant, very, very simple.
Yeah.
So having sort of cream, champagne, flecked roses and this in your hair will make it look wedding.
Yeah.
Because the dress is totally not a wedding colour.
I'm very excited. All right, so last month we announced our Austrian Alps knitting retreat with Charlotte Stone. And shortly after we opened up for registrations, it was completely booked out. So that was amazing, and we are very grateful for all the enthusiasm. Because the waiting list got a bit long, we decided to host a second retreat 1 week earlier. So that's from the 12th to the 17th of October. Now, the location and the program will remain the same, but the workshops will be led by the UK knitwear designer, Farell. So Georgia is one of Rowan's leading designers, and we interviewed her back in episode 123. Georgia's style is very much influenced by architecture. She loves exploring different cities and studying the lines and patterns of modern architecture. And then she translates them into knitwear designs using bold colours, strong shapes, and textured knitting. Georgia also pays very close attention to detail and is a highly skilled and thoughtful teacher, so we're very pleased to have her with us for this retreat. In one workshop, she's going to show us how to combine intarsia with textured stitches to add depth and contrast to our knitting. And in another, she'll guide us through choosing harmonious colour combinations by understanding the proportion and balance within a colour palette. And in the final session, we'll design our very own intarsia patterns and turn them into knitting charts. So you will have plenty of opportunity to learn in a really fun and relaxed environment. Alongside the workshops, we will also spend one afternoon in the charming historical town Innsbruck. So this outing includes, but is not limited to, a tour of the beautiful old court church, as well as a traditional Tyrolean dinner and a fun evening of Tyrolean music and dance performances. On another day, we'll take a scenic ferry ride around Lake Aachen, which is the largest lake in Tyrol, so it's also just a 5-minute walk away from the resort that we're staying at. Lake Aachen offers truly stunning natural surroundings. It's wedged between the Karwende Mountains on one side and the Brandenberg Mountains on the other side, and the water is incredibly clear and blue. In winter, this is a very popular destination for cross-country skiers, but in spring, summer and autumn, which is when we're going to be attending, it's a really great place to go hiking, biking and do water sports, as most of the lake has public access. And on a different day, we will also take a gondola ride up into the mountains for a short hike with breathtaking views from above. We still have some spots available for the first retreat, so that will go from the 12th to the 17th of October 2025 this year. And if you would like to join us, we would love to have you. So visit our website, artisanretreats.com, and just fill out the registration form. All right, so coming up now is our interview with the embroiderer Manuela Thüler. Manuela has been very interested in Japan since she was a child, starting with her love for manga and anime, which I can relate to because I loved watching anime when I was a teenager and also my early 20s. There's some great stuff out there. And that's why a big part of this interview covers the Japanese embroidery technique, sashiko. So we'll be talking about the history and she'll show us some beautiful examples of the technique.
So we'll see you on the other side.
Yeah. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Today I'm joined by Manuela Thüler, a designer from Bern, Switzerland, with a passion for traditional Japanese textiles and craft traditions. So her work focuses on mindfulness, appreciating every stitch and enjoying the process as much as the end result. And during the Swiss Yarn Festival, Manuela is teaching a variety of workshops, encouraging her participants to stay curious and tell stories through their embroidery. So Manuela, thank you so much for joining us on Fruity Knitting.
Thank you, I'm happy to be here.
Now, what draws you to embroidery in general and Japanese textiles, and what is your goal as a teacher?
Yeah, so with embroidery, I found beautiful way to combine creativity and textile craft. It lets me express myself very free. I think it's almost like painting with thread. And I always loved Japan since I was very young. It all started with anime and manga. And so sashiko is a traditional Japanese embroidery and repairing technique. And so this brings together my love for Japan, for textiles, traditional crafts, but also mindfulness and slow fashion. And so in my workshops, my mission is to help others being creative and, to connect with the things they make and use in everyday life.
Yeah. So you've brought some examples.
Yes, I brought some examples of the embroidery techniques I teach in my workshops. So this is sashiko, which I already mentioned, the Japanese embroidery, some way of mending with sashiko. But I also teach more traditional embroidery techniques, like, for example, these flower embroideries or slow stitching. This one, which is a more intuitive and spontaneous embroidery technique.
So it's a little bit like freestyle knitting.
Yes, maybe, yeah.
So you're especially passionate about Japanese textiles, the traditions there. What sets Japanese textiles and embroidery apart from those of other cultures?
So to explain this, we need to travel back in time. Because in Europe, embroidery always was decorative and a luxury. So it was for the upper class or often used in a religious context. This kind of embroidery also exists in Japan, but it's usually made with silken materials.
So it's reserved for the upper class.
Exactly, yes. But however, in Japan, some other embroidery techniques developed from repairing and quilting the textiles and the clothes they had. And sashiko, also kogin, is another embroidery technique. Started all with mending and repairing. So the poor people, they had to mend their clothes. And so I can show you some examples actually, which I found on antique markets. For example, this piece here, you can see it's double layered and repaired with several fabrics pieces. But it's stitched simply with running stitch to also reinforce it, and no decorative pattern at all. So the main goal was the repairing. Another beautiful example is this sokin. It's called sokin. It's a cleaning cloth, actually. So even when they couldn't repair the cloth anymore, they still used the fabric they had left to stitch this kind of household textiles like cleaning cloth. And as well, you can see it's simple running stitches. And so that's why what I find so interesting. It's a very simple technique and with a practical purpose. And
so, sorry, again, this is double layered, right? And that's why they're embroidering
maybe even
those
more,
layers together.
So several layers to use it, with water to clean things.
Yeah.
And I still think they're so beautiful and so meaningful. And it's all about not wasting the things.
Yeah, the Japanese have a special word for that, don't they? For that idea?
Yes, exactly. It's mottainai, and it means it's a shame to waste. And this idea is all about respecting and reusing the materials we have. And they really did.
Yeah.
Today, the sashiko is more decorative, or over time they started with using more patterns, and they used the patterns they already knew from other creative arts. And these are very traditional patterns, and they often have a meaning or a Buddhist background. So for example here, this pattern is called asanoha, which means a hemp leaf. And
so where's the hemp leaf in this pattern?
It's it's this star.
Okay.
It's like a symbolized hemp leaf, and it's a symbol for strength and vitality, just as the hemp plant is.
Yeah.
And
what about this one?
this one is also a very nice vintage piece, and it's the pattern is called Sayagata, and you can see part of it is the swastika cross, which is a very famous symbol in Buddhism for well-being.
Yeah. And you got these all from an antique flea market?
Yeah, in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah,
I found
that's
these
great.
pieces.
So then why don't you tell us a bit more about the technique itself for sashiko?
So today, sashiko is decorative embroidery, but still you can see the difference in the tools and the technique. So shall we show? Look at the technique. A big difference is that you don't use an embroidery hoop, because you stitch all across the fabric and not just like one motif after the other, like you do maybe with flower stitching. And you also use a much longer needle than the classical embroidery needle. And that's why you do more than one stitch. So you make several running stitches and all across the fabric. And this is very similar to quilting, actually, still. And we also use different thimbles. So I guess you all know this one for the fingertip. The sashiko thimble is used kind of like a finger ring. And
that
you
one's
have
really
it like
interesting,
this.
yeah.
And this is comes together with a long needle. So if you have this long needle and you hold it like this and you push it with this ring and you do several stitches, and then you can push it from here, which is easier than maybe with this one. And so to start sashiko, you first have to draw a grid, because you have seen the patterns, they are very geometrically and very like linear. And so you draw a grid or some guidelines. And for this, I like using heat erasable pens like these. And then I use this set scale or a quilting ruler. Exactly. I draw the lines, and then I start stitching, as I said, all across the fabric. And you start with, let's say, horizontal lines, and then you first stitch all the horizontal lines, and then the diagonals, and so on. So the final pattern you see just at the end when you're done with your stitching.
Yeah. Exactly, and you've got some more examples for us here.
Yeah, right.
This one looks a bit more difficult, but you said it was easy.
Yeah, it looks difficult, but it's actually very easy, because you just do some running stitches and then you weave another yarn through, and then it makes this beautiful pattern.
Yeah.
And this one, for example, it's always easy when it comes to the stitch, because it's always a running stitch. But here you have to draw a 5mm grid, which already takes a long time. And then it's just a lot. You have to stitch a lot, because you have like first the horizontal, then the diagonals, and so on. So it's a lot of stitches.
So you've brought some examples with you of your own clothes where you mended them using sashiko.
Yeah.
How about we have a look at them now?
Yes. So here you can see one of my jeans, and the back part, on the back part, the fabric was already very thin here. And that's why I reinforced it with cotton fabric on the inside. And then I didn't want a very eye-catching pattern on this part of the pants. So I just used a very simple sashiko pattern and a similar blue for the thread.
Yeah.
So this shirt was a gift. My partner got it from a friend. He brought it from Cuba, and the shirt was completely worn out, washed out, and it had a lot of holes in it, so impossible to mend. But still, it was very precious to him because it was a gift from a good friend. So I tried to give it a second life, and for that I cut the print out and applied it on a new shirt with kind of a iron-on foil. And I added some running stitches around to secure it and some
decorative
simple
sashiko
patterns as a decoration.
Yeah.
And
and a little bit of text
a little bit of text with back stitches.
That's great. I'm sure he was thrilled.
Yeah, he's very happy.
Yeah.
So here we have a cashmere sweater, and so on all my sweaters, sooner or later I have to repair my elbows. So that's why I'm experimenting with different techniques, how I can do it. And on this one, I used needle felting to repair the hole first, and then as a decoration, I added some simple running stitches in different colors.
Yeah. Well, besides sashiko, what other embroidery techniques are you particularly interested in?
I really love slow stitching. It's the complete opposite of sashiko, actually. It's not about stitching slowly. It's all about stitching without a plan, very spontaneous and very intuitive.
So it's freestyle.
Yeah, it's very
basically.
freestyle, yes.
You've got a book here?
Yeah, I have a book here because I like to compare it with maybe writing a diary or keeping a sketchbook. And so last year I made this stitch diary over a couple of months. And first for me it was a piece of practice. But now I think it's also a beautiful source of inspiration for me and also for the participants in my workshops.
Yeah.
And so what I did is, for example, here, I wanted to practice the appliqué technique, which comes from quilting, where you apply just some fabrics, and then I really liked this floral pattern, and I was curious about it. How could I make it with stitching? So here I tried to stitch this flower, trying out which stitches could be are the right ones to stitch this kind of flower. Yes, exactly.
It's gorgeous.
Another example might be here. I liked the circle shapes, so I tried to find a stitch where I could do some circles. And the blanket stitch, which I chose, it's a beautiful stitch to, you can play around with the size, the length of the stitches, and the color combinations, and so on.
Yeah.
And on this one, I had this nice silken fabric scrap with this beautiful floral pattern. And so I thought, why not take this floral idea and do some flower tendril-like embroidery. And I tried to play with a color contrast here. Or appliqué, like if you have very wild threads. Also wool, for example, is nice when you apply it.
Yeah, I like how you played with the ends, yeah.
Yeah, I often take some inspiration from the fabric patterns, for example, or just some stitches I want to try out. So here as well, I had this blue leaf from a vintage piece of fabric, and I kind of mirrored it in the design. Here is some sashiko weaving, as we have seen before.
Well, thank you for showing us your stitch diary. It's very inspirational.
Thank you.
I was also very inspired by the projects you showed us, your own jeans and the sweater. I have quite a lot of sweaters at home that need stitching up as well. So you've given me some good ideas. Right, well, thank you for coming on to the show, and let's say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Bye.
So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that very tranquil last scene of Manuela embroidering in nature with the birds and the insects all around. I would love to do some more knitting, but I'm not going to trust myself to knit while we're filming because I cannot afford to do any more
Design
mistakes.
features.
Design features.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Mum asked if she can knit my jumper, but last time she made a mistake, so I thankfully declined.
I know, I must be getting worse.
You just need to wear your glasses.
Yeah, I need to wear my glasses.
So one thing we're especially proud of is the rich variety of content that we offer on Fruity Knitting, from tutorials to travel vlogs to talking about our knitting projects to interviews with excellent designers, yarn producers, fibre artists, and even farmers. So we love just sharing their stories and expertise with the worldwide knitting community. To produce each episode, it takes many hours of research, filming, editing, occasionally travel, not to mention all of the other behind-the-scenes administration work that simply comes with running a YouTube channel. So, if you value this podcast and like watching our episodes, then help us continue this work by becoming a Fruity Knitting patron. By donating just $5 a month, you help us to create new Fruity Knitting episodes for yourself and for thousands of other knitters out there worldwide to enjoy and benefit from. So visit patreon.com/fruityknitting, where you can become a Hebridean, a Merino, or a Shetland patron. Thanks very much for your support. All right, so we're going to move on to under construction. We're back in under construction with the Wade Rundfeld sweater, which I'm making for my fiancé, Ryan. So I think that I started this jumper 6 or 7 months ago.
I'll hold it for you.
And I'm still working on it. And I have had some projects in between, but basically I got stuck on the yoke because originally I knitted this, some of you will remember, in a very bright blue for the main colour. And that's a beautiful bright blue, but I did regret the colour combination, so I decided to replace it with the navy blue.
And it looks brilliant now.
It looks, I think it looks a bit more boring, but it also looks more elegant. So I'm happy with the change. And to avoid having to unravel everything that I'd knitted so far, I had to perform some pretty intense knitting surgery. So that ended up being quite fun and educational, which is why I don't mind. This yoke is knitted bottom up. And because I wanted to knit the yoke first, I started with a provisional cast on. And that also means that replacing the bright blue neckline was very easy. I just unraveled and reknit it using the dark blue for the main colour. But the bottom section was a little bit more complicated. I had to cut open my yoke, remove the old bottom section, reknit it using the navy blue for the main colour, and then graft those two pieces together.
Yeah, so just to be clear for any new viewers, the navy blue here was always part of the yoke pattern, but on the main body down here and around the neckline, there was a very bright Cookie Monster blue.
Don't say Cookie Monster.
Ryan won't watch.
Yeah. Here is what my original yoke looked like. So to graft two sections of colour work together, it's best to choose a row that has only one colour. This simplifies the grafting process as it's easier to work with a single strand of yarn rather than multiple strands of different coloured yarns. So in my knitting project, I originally decided to do the grafting on this row here, which is entirely beige. I reknitted the lower part of the yoke up to this row with the blue and beige stitches. Then on the top piece, I picked up the stitches 2 rows higher in the pattern, which had beige and green stitches. I then cut open the row beneath and unravelled it. So this left me with 2 rows of live stitches that I would graft together. And in the process of grafting, I would recreate that single beige row in between the 2 rows that I'd picked up. So I thought the rest of the grafting process would be really easy since I wouldn't have to graft on a colourwork row. However, when I began grafting, the green floats from the top half that were meant to stay at the back of the fabric kept showing through to the front. And no matter what I tried, how much I messed around with it, I couldn't find a way to fix this issue. So then I looked for an alternative approach and I came across a tutorial by Lucy Neatbee, which I highly recommend. It's called Grafting Made Easy. So Lucy Neatbee is a very experienced knitter who I think is originally from the UK, but she lives in Canada, and we interviewed her during our trip to the Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival last year. So her interview is going to come out sometime in the next few months. That's something to look forward to. Lucy has a different grafting method that I find a lot more intuitive than the one where you use the tapestry needle on and bind together 2 rows of live stitches. Yeah. I think it's still a form of Kitchener stitch. I'm not sure. Anyway, so I find her method a lot more intuitive. I really liked it. And so I've prepared a very short tutorial for you to show you how I applied Lucy's method to my Vardel Rundfeld sweater. And that is coming up now.
Which has obviously worked perfectly.
Yes. Usually we picture a knit stitch as a V shape. So to our eyes, stocking stitch fabric consists of multiple V's lined up next to or on top of each other. But in fact, the path that our yarn takes when creating a stocking stitch fabric looks more like this. So these are 3 rows of stocking stitch, and this little section I've marked red is what we recognize as the V shape of a single knit stitch. Let's move on to the grafting. Using a tapestry needle and some yarn, I want to sew together these 2 rows from the top and bottom halves of my yoke sweater. When you graft together 2 pieces of fabric that were both knitted in the same direction, in my case bottom up, this is called perfect grafting. So the columns of knit stitches line up perfectly. Starting at the top half of my yoke, I guide my yarn to the back, around the base of stitch 1 and to the front again. And now I thread my needle around the left leg of stitch 2 and the right leg of stitch 3, bringing the needle first to the back of my fabric and then to the front again. And that is it. You simply repeat these 2 movements until your fabric is entirely grafted together. So that's the concept, and now I'll show you how I applied it to my knitting. I've already grafted most of my yoke with just this small section here left to finish. And so this is what the final pattern will look like. You can tell that the motif that I grafted together sort of resembles the letter A. And on the bottom part of my yoke, you can see the 2 legs of the A, while the top part will complete the shape once I've grafted it. And luckily I'm grafting on a row that has a single colour, which is the green row right here. I've made it simple for myself this way because I could have also grafted a few rows up where I would have to use green and blue yarn, and that is possible, but it's a bit more complicated. Now, using Lucy's method, you don't actually graft live stitches to other live stitches. Therefore, I've left these extra rows on the top part of the yoke, just beneath the row that I want to graft. And additionally, I've added 5 rows above the grafting row at the bottom of the yoke using bright yellow waste yarn. So this contrasting yellow is really great because it makes it easier for me to follow the correct row while grafting and not accidentally move up or down a row. I'm actually going to pin this back and out of the way because stocking stitch tends to curl in on itself. Now we're ready to begin grafting. Looking at this letter A, I will sew the second row of the letter A, which is on my bottom yoke, 1, 2, this row here, together with the 4th row on the top of my yoke, on this top yoke here. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the row that I'm targeting. This is the last stitch that I've grafted. It's a bit loose, but we're going to leave it that way for now. So the next stitch is here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I insert the needle behind this knit stitch on the top half of the yoke and pull the yarn through. Leave that nice and loosely because you can always tighten it later on, but it's very difficult to loosen your grafted stitches later on. So next, I join the top yoke with the bottom yoke by passing the needle, first of all, under the left leg of the knit stitch beneath, and then under the right leg of the stitch next to that. And again, don't pull too tightly. You can adjust later. And that's all it is. I keep repeating these 2 steps, working from right to left until I've grafted the entire section. Go up and under the full knit stitch on the top piece. Then down and under the left and right legs of 2 neighbouring stitches on the bottom piece. Up and under, down and under. Just repeat that. And the key thing to remember is you always go around a whole stitch on the top piece and around 2 halves of adjacent stitches on the bottom piece. I love this method because you can actually see the stitch you're recreating as you go. It feels much simpler than grafting live stitches on 2 needles, which I find can be a bit confusing. And if I make a mistake, it's really easy to unpick and fix it since I don't have to pick up any live stitches while doing so. Now, one more tip. Graft loosely. You can always tighten the stitches later with a darning needle, but fixing the gauge if you grafted too tightly is much harder. So now that I've completed my grafting, you can see that the stitches line up beautifully. There is a bump here due to the waste fabric, but I'm going to unravel that now. And once this waste fabric is removed, I will also check my gauge to see if any stitches need to be tightened or loosened. And finally, I will weave in the ends.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Actually, when I was looking at that and thinking, in our upcoming interview with Tanis Gray, Tanis shows us exactly how to do colourwork grafting to colourwork grafting. Did you actually watch that?
I did, but after I learned a new technique, so I forgot about that. Yeah. Anyway, I am actually glad that I learned this different technique because even though it's so basic, it gave me a much clearer understanding of how our knitting is structured, especially stocking stitch knitting.
Yeah, it's really important to understand the pathway of the yarn.
Yeah. And even though I've been knitting for years, it was never that clear to me, So I think you will also enjoy this technique. Anyway, so after I did the grafting, I picked up the stitches along the provisional cast on, which I'd done with a crocheted chain stitch. And this time I did it right because last time I did this ages ago, I did it wrong and it was really fiddly to unpick. But for the first time, you just pull it and it comes out and you can pick up the stitches really nicely. Yeah, that was great. So I added some extra rows to the yoke before dividing for the arms and body. And when you do that, you, of course, have to cast on some additional stitches here for the body. And since then, I've just been knitting in the round and it's been going very quickly.
It does. And the neck is looking really good. Like you've done the neck very well. It looks like it's going to sit flat but also be stretchy.
Yeah, and I've been trying it on Ryan very regularly.
Good.
Because Mum keeps asking me every 2 days.
Have you tried it on him yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so coming up now is our feature interview with the very talented Tanis Gray. And if you haven't come across her movie-themed knitting books before, I really highly recommend them. They are fantastic for gift ideas for friends, maybe friends who aren't normally so comfortable wearing hand-knitted things. And my favourite of her book, of course, is The Lord of the Rings. I love that series. And I just want to show you a couple of my favourites within this book. So this is one of my favourites, The Hobbit with his hairy toes, which is super cute, and his curly hair. That's a great detail. And then there's also an extra set of clothes for him. It actually looks a bit like a Bavarian outfit with lederhosen here and a little vest, but that's gorgeous. The other one I love is the Gollum toy, My Precious, which is super cute. There's a little ring down here. And there is a really gorgeous sweater design in here, which I want to show you. I'll start off by, there we are. So that is based on or inspired by the elves' leather armour. And this crisscross here is just a stunning detail. And the colour, the shiny, I suppose you'd call it beige colour, it really does look like buttery leather. So I think that's totally stunning. Here's a close-up one. You can see how I think I will have to knit this. And there's a little detail here on the sleeve, which is really beautiful. So besides these books, Tanis has over 300 designs on Ravelry using every technique imaginable, but mainly stranded colour work since that's her absolute favourite. And Tanis has kindly offered Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount on all of her self-published patterns from her Ravelry store. So enjoy browsing through her designs, and a very big thank you to Tanis for this generous offer. So enjoy the interview, and thanks again for spending time with us.
Yeah, and we'll see you again in June. Bye.
Bye. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. I'm here with Tanis Gray, who's an accomplished knitwear designer, avid crafter, and award-winning author of 16 books. And in the early 2000s, Tanis was regularly featured on PBS, Knitting Daily Television with Vicky Howell, and she also served as an editor for the Vogue Knitting magazine. On top of that, she's worked on projects with Warner Brothers, Disney, Lucasfilm, and Tim Burton. And Tanis often draws her inspiration from stories, designing pieces based on movie and book characters, and she has a particular passion for stranded colourwork knitting. Wow, that is such an amazing CV when I think about it. And I'm so thrilled that you said yes for this interview, because we've never had anybody who's been working with the industry, the film industry, so closely. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I do have that weird combination of knitwear designer. I have a film background. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design and I studied film animation video there, triple majored, with the intention of becoming a Disney animator. That was always my dream. And for a little while, because I've knit almost my whole life, I toyed with the idea of going into textiles. And my father kind of politely steered me back to animation and said, you will never have a job in textiles. So make sure that you stick with your animation. So here we are. But I loved RISD, and it was great to be in a creative environment. And when I left there, I was recruited by Martha Stewart after graduation. And for a little while, I made the crafts for her kids' magazine and also worked across the hall at HBO, animating for their children's TV station. And after that, I went and worked in film and TV for a number of years. So always creating, always crafting. I worked in the prop department and the art department. So any sort of graphics they needed or anything that needed to be made, occasionally wardrobe would steal me away if they needed something knit, which was always great to bring that knitting back into play. And I did that for a number of years. And I just got kind of tired of the hours. You know, you're on set at 5 in the morning, you're home at midnight. It's difficult. And so I worked at Vogue Knitting after that. And I was the yarn editor, which was wonderful to be back in the knitting industry. And I missed film, but
that, just very quickly, that's amazing that you actually ended up being able to combine both of your passions together and make a career out of it. So animation and knitting.
I was very lucky. So after Vogue Knitting, where I was the yarn editor, and I was sort of the liaison between the magazine and the book department and the knitters. So getting them yarn, keeping my pulse on the yarn industry, seeing what was new and exciting, what we could feature in the issue, getting these designers to submit ideas, and then kind of holding their hand as they knit through their project and making sure they were photo ready for the magazines. I did that for a number of years, and we left New York City and we moved to Washington, D.C. And I wasn't really sure, do I go back into film? Do I stay with knitting? And I decided to stay with knitting and began working with Vicky Howell on PBS's Knitting Daily, which was great because I got to have that film and video aspect back. So that had me thinking, how much I loved marrying these two things together. How could I further that? It was wonderful. And I got to meet a lot of really interesting people and designers from all over. And, when I wasn't doing that, I was able to design my own projects and work with other things. I'm a huge quilter. I love to quilt. I like all of the old crafts. I really like bargello and needlepoint. I spoon carve. Really, if it's old and obscure and tedious, then I am very interested in it. So that's what makes me a good knitter. And then I got approached by my publisher, Insight Editions, to work. And it was because of that trifecta of publishing, knitwear designer, and a film background to work on official knitting books.
Yeah.
And this was really exciting because it had never been done before. And they had never done a knitting book, and I had never done a knitting book with an official company that had access to things like this. So it was a perfect marriage.
Yeah. Well, since 2019, Tanis has published 7 movie-themed knitting books. So there's been 2 on Harry Potter, 1 on Star Wars, 1 Knitting with Disney, Fellowship of the Knits, which of course is based on Lord of the Rings, Nightmare Before Christmas, based on the Tim Burton movie, and most recently, which is only just come out, is one based on the Gilmore Girls.
Right, the TV series.
Yeah. So can you talk about your collaboration with Warner Brothers and Disney, including how you got to choose which movies to work on, and also how you adapted your design approach and structured each of the knitting books?
So when my publisher approached me, I had already had 11 books under my belt with interweave and 6 and spring books. And so I'm very familiar with how books are made, but it's a little bit different when you're working with a licensor. So we have official versus unofficial, and they're very different. And a lot of people think, an unofficial book would be easier. You have free reign, but you actually have a lot more guidelines that you have to work within. So when they approached me, it was originally for the Harry Potter book, which was based on the films.
Yeah.
And they had, again, never done a knitting book. So I was kind of leading them down the path of how to do that. And they were kind of leading me down the path of how to work with an official licensor. So it was very exciting. And we had a list a mile long of future, someday, I hope, projects.
And could you choose that? Could you say, I want to do this, this, and this, and this?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that it will happen, right? Because it all depends on the licensing and if they're willing to do that. So something like Knitting with Disney was great because I had already worked on Star Wars, and Disney owns Lucasfilm. And then Nightmare Before Christmas is also owned by Disney. So that was helpful because they are very different fandoms, and I will only work on a book that I love the fandom for, because when you're spending 2 years of your life on something, you better like it. And it was just kind of fun because I knew how Disney worked. I knew how they liked things noted and how they liked the sources and everything like that. So before I even think about the knitting, I start with the research, which is my favorite part. I love research.
So you're quite geeky yourself.
Yes.
Then.
Oh yeah. Definitely a geek. Yep. and I'm good with that. And it's fun because you get to take a deep dive into this world that you love. And it's about 6 months of solid research. And that could be anywhere from the universe of, so something like Lord of the Rings. It is an entire universe made up by Tolkien with its own languages and its own folklore, their own races. There's dwarves and elves and humans and hobbits and all sorts of things. Whereas something like Nightmare Before Christmas, which I worked on at the same time, which was very confusing. I had to start doing Nightmare Days and Fellowship Days because it was just too much for my brain to handle. That's a 76-minute film. So finding 28 projects or so for a very limited film could be tricky versus this whole vast universe. Yeah. So same with Star Wars. We've got multiple universes, creatures that, you can't even imagine. And it's such a big world or universe to kind of rein that down into 28 projects. Yeah. So how do we hit all the high notes? Are we representing all the important characters? Are we maybe harking on important parts of the film? are the colors right?
Yeah, yeah. And also for the knitters, the skill level.
Yeah, skill level is really important. I don't want these to only be for expert knitters. I want you to be able to pick this up if you've just picked up knitting needles versus if, you've been knitting your whole life. And the best emails I get are from people who say, I learned to knit because I wanted to make something in your book. And I started off with, the washcloths, and then I knit my first sweater. That is the best compliment. I made you want to knit. That's fantastic.
So have you actually organised them so they've got progressive skill levels within one book?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
From very beginner all the way up to I can knit absolutely anything. And size inclusivity is really important to me as well. I want us to be able to size these. Most of the garments are sized through 70-inch bust where applicable. Some are just for kids. But that's really important to me too. We're not all one size fits all. So, and same with our models. I want our models to look like real humans. And when we can, I like us to shoot outdoors. So something like Fellowship, that whole book is about the land and living with nature and the importance of that relationship between, creature, because they're not all humans, and the land. So can we shoot this outside versus just in a studio with props?
So Fellowship of the Knits is based on Fellowship of the Rings, and it's called, it's not Lord of the Rings officially because you weren't allowed to do that. Is that right?
Yes.
But you could do it here. So show us how you've got around that.
Yeah, so the Tolkien estate will not do craft books, and so we had to be very careful with our wording, and we could not use any film stills. So something like Nightmare or Star Wars or Disney or whatever, we can use the film stills, which give it this nice sort of scrapbook element of, oh yeah, that was that scene from that film, or there's quotes from the film, but we couldn't do that. So I was given, before I even started, a 3-page list of words I could not use for project titles. So something like, we all know our hobbits, I couldn't call it a hobbit toy. I had to call it a little folk toy. So we got clever with wording, and I really had to sit there and think, this is recognizable as a hobbit, but we can't call it that.
And there's another picture of it showing his hairy feet. Do you know where that is?
Yeah. And that's important too, because hobbits have really hairy feet. That's part of their thing. And, their clothes are really important. So we actually provide a change of clothes for him in the pattern, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
And another example of that would be, this is Gollum. And I mean, he looks pretty, he's the happy version of Gollum, not the angry version. And we could not call it the Gollum toy. So we called it the My Precious toy. And I love that we put the little ring there with him. So there are ways around it, but it was tricky. And my manuscript actually got, for the first time in my life, rejected because I was writing in an official capacity. So I had to rewrite it. They said, just you're being too official and you got to be more open-ended and vague. And I had to kind of tone down my manuscript because it was not official.
Okay, but you could be very official with Star Wars. I think Star Wars has got examples of film pictures in it as well, hasn't it? If you want to have them.
Yeah, and the porgs are great. My son immediately made me knit him one of those. But it is nice when we're in an official capacity because we do get the film stills. And for Lord of the Rings, we didn't have any of that. But Star Wars, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So having access to their archives and like getting to see the original Yoda puppet, and that was really, my geeky heart was very happy to see all that. And doing all the research of the behind the scenes and getting to use quotes and things like that, it just makes for a more enhanced experience. A lot of these books, I want them to be not just knitting patterns. I want them to be an experience and make you think about your favorite parts of the film or the universe and something like Star Wars. And they're for super fans.
Yeah. This is actually from Star Wars, isn't it? So
yes. So I do sometimes what I call a deep dive into a project where this looks like a beautiful scarf, but it's so much more. If you look at Chancellor Palpatine, who's kind of the baddie in Star Wars, he wears this red silk brocade, like stole almost. And if you look at it really closely, yes, it's made of silk and it's woven, but it has this pattern on it. So pulling that pattern out and turning it into a knit stitch And then using a yarn, he wears a lot of red and he wears a lot of black that represents his character. It's a little nod to, you might be a baddie, but you like knitting too, and you like to wear it. So
the real fans will be able to pick this up, right?
Yeah, and I love doing stuff like that. We call those the deep dives. And so they're not obvious, but if you're a super fan, they probably are. So another example of that would be these fingerless mitts from the first Harry Potter book. When they are in the dueling club, and the knitting books are based off of the films, they are on this long blue mat, and it has the lunar phases on it. And, they're dueling with their wands. So this is the pattern from that runner that they're on. And, it kind of mimics the shape. When you put them on your arm, they're almost elbow length. So, and it's also, and they're cozy. And it's a nice way to get another technique in there. So I don't want everything to just be knits and purls. I want all skills and all techniques where possible covered. So I love knitting with beads. So any excuse to throw some beads in there is great.
And also stranded colourwork knitting, which is your favourite, is excellent for putting in pictures and graphic designs for the characters, isn't it?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's the best way to represent a scene that might not otherwise be represented in any other way. So this is a pivotal moment in the story of Nightmare Before Christmas, when Jack kind of goes off through his world and he's on that swirl hill. This is just the perfect way to represent this. And, having his faces on the inside is really nice too. And then, we have a fact about it and, a film still, which just enhances the experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's great.
And this book was really important to me because I did a big puppet animation or stop motion animation my junior year at RISD, and I'd always wanted to do something with this book. So that was kind of a lifelong dream to get to do this one. I was really excited about this one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What are a couple of other things that were your favourite from this book?
With this one, it was tricky, again, because 28 projects and 76 minutes of film. There's many characters in this film, but, we don't want to be too heavy on Sally or too heavy on Jack, but Jack always wears this black tailcoat. So how can we elevate that into sort of fashion? So this was a really beautiful project because it's this tailored cardigan. There's a flat shot.
Yes.
With these beautiful, and his jacket is pinstriped. So instead of making it that, we can kind of evoke that with the cables.
That's really gorgeous. I like it.
It's really pretty. And it's one of those magical garments that looks good on everyone, which is, I think, really important as well. And then for Sally, and here's, again, another example of that spiral hill, which is, you see that and you immediately know it's Nightmare Before Christmas. So this was really important. And we got some intarsia in there.
And very quickly, you're working with quite a lot of designers. So how do you choose them? Because you're scouting with for new designers a lot too.
Yeah, and I really like to give new designers a chance that may not have otherwise. So it's by invitation only. I'm always online checking new designers out, looking at their work, seeing if they are interested, and I'll ask them to submit, which doesn't necessarily mean they're in the book, but it gives them a chance to submit a design. And I have to submit for my own books too. So, it's not just a free pass. I am also a designer.
Yeah.
So
okay, so I'd like you just to talk a little bit more about how you choose and design individual pieces that not only capture the real essence of the movie characters, but also are going to appeal to very different knitting audiences.
So one of the first things I do when I start a project is I think about the color palette because they are unique to the project. So for something like Fellowship of the Knits, we're working with very earthy colors, very natural. There's no fluorescence.
Yeah.
There's no bright pops of color.
True.
So if you think about the creatures that live in this world, they're using natural materials to make what they wear. So whether it's a hobbit knitting a little waistcoat or something like the elves, this is my favorite project in this book. It's just beautiful and unique. And in the films, they make these kind of crisscross leather tops out of just strips of leather. So how can we mimic that in knitting? So it's not only a challenge of finding the proper blend of fiber, but the color is incredibly important. So this should look like buttery kind of well-worn, battle ready.
It does.
Yeah, it does not look like
Perfect
wool.
like that, yeah.
And that's one of my, I think, most challenging and favorite parts is picking the yarns. Certain colors really can make or break a garment.
Yeah.
So, for example, like in the Disney book, color is extremely important. So if I'm looking at something like the Cinderella cowl here, that is Cinderella blue. There's no other way to describe it. So when she kind of does her beautiful burst into that gorgeous blue
Dress,
gown,
yeah.
That has to be that same color. And I also want this to look like gold because the coach was all sparkly and kind of glowy. But stranded colorwork, as you said, is my absolute favorite. So when I am kind of submitting to my own books, almost everything I submit is stranded colorwork. So that's another reason I like to work with other designers, because I don't...
some variation.
Yeah, otherwise it would be all stranded colorwork all the time. And that's not everyone's favorite. So... but I always like to tell a story in my designs too. So here we've not only got the pumpkin coach, but the pumpkins that it was before it turned into that. And then hearts to kind of, it's a love story. It's a classic love story. But this color it's perfect. And that also brings out the essence of a character, which is, these projects are representing certain characters. So for example, in Nightmare, we are combining this interesting blend of not only very much neutral, black and white is a huge theme in the sets and the characters, but it's also Halloween Town. So we've got your classic orange, and there's purples, and there's a lot of acid green, and it's a really specific palette. And Disney likes to be very specific. So finding that perfect orange color, this is really important. Whereas with Star Wars, it is a very neutral palette. There's a lot of metal and technology. We get a little bit away from that in something like the Ewoks who live in a forest moon, but you got to find a way to make black and white exciting and interesting.
That's a challenge.
It can be really tricky. So in Star Wars, sometimes we're also playing with texture. So for example, this is a baby Chewbacca. So he needs to be fuzzy, but it's not really fun to knit with fibers like that. It can be tricky and you can easily drop stitches. So we found a wool that it was a mohair blend, and after she knit it, she kind of took a cat brush and brushed it up to give him a little bit of fluff, and it works perfectly.
Yeah.
And again, trying to make black and white interesting. So sometimes we are making costume replicas, and that is also very dependent. So something like Gilmore Girls, that's a TV show where all the garments were bought off the rack. We can't do costume replicas because that copyright belongs to the person who designed that garment, who sold it to a store who then used it in the TV show. So in something like Star Wars, it's all bespoke. So she's wearing this, very classy vest. So can we turn that into knitting? Yes, we can. So stuff like that gets me really excited. How can we turn this, polyester vest and make it into a beautiful wool, something that you would want to wear? So one thing I really had a lot of fun with was this Knitting with Disney book, because again, I watched The Little Mermaid when I was a kid, and I sat there in awe. My mom had to physically pick me up and take me out of the theater and said, that's what I want to do. I want to be an animator. So The Little Mermaid is very near and dear to my heart. So when I was thinking about how can we represent Ariel, she's a mermaid. So that's hard. She's not wearing sweaters underwater. She's certainly not wearing any pants or socks. So how can we turn that into knitting?
And not everyone wants to knit a purple bra.
Yeah, that's a shell. That seems very uncomfortable. So we took the scales from her tail and put that into socks. And we've mimicked the shell bra there. She has her beautiful red hair, just like you. And then she's a princess. So there are ways to kind of use color to influence a design as well, which is really exciting. So we did that again in Disney with Pocahontas. The Colors of the Wind was, I think, the first song that ever won a Grammy for Disney. So she has all these leaves that are blowing around. She's talking about all the colors of the wind. She has an upper arm tattoo. So how can we do that to represent a really important character in a respectful way in knitting? And anytime I can get a rainbow in there, I'm happy. So this Colors of the Wind allowed us to use a really beautiful gradient. We've got the leaves. stranded colorwork is my favorite. We used kind of a rustic wool because a lot of that film takes place outside as well. So kind of, I always think about the character. Okay, where did they live? What are they doing? Are we using hand-dyed versus, not hand-dyed? Do we need that extra depth that a hand-dyed can give? And then here's another example of a deep dive. Anakin from Star Wars has this pillow in his room. And then later on, a few films down the road, you see that same fabric he's wearing. It's almost like a cravat tucked under a jacket. So pulling that deep dive in, using the right colors, it's kind of a washed out because it's aged with the films. So this washed out charcoal and that lighter kind of sand color because he lived in the desert. And those are the kinds of interesting things. It's like a huge puzzle. So we've got the character. I have a vague idea of what it's going to look like. It's like doing a puzzle without a box front, the picture. Okay, do I have the right texture? Is the right color? Will it be available? And then I always make sure the designers like the yarn. Because I've worked with all sorts of magazines and books all over the world. And it's disappointing to get a yarn that may not complete your vision the way that you wanted it to. So I always say, here's what I was thinking. Does this work for you? I want the designers to be happy.
Yeah.
It should be a fun experience. And you want the project to look the best it can look.
Now, this does look really elegant. Is this motif here actually a symbol that's used in the film?
It is taken from that textile in his room that he later wears. So it's a little bit like that Chancellor Palpatine, like the true nerds get it.
Yeah.
And,
That's exciting. And what about this over here? That's also Star Wars?
This is also Star Wars. So again, taking just black and white. And I liked the idea of kind of a very traditional stranded colorwork, almost Norwegian style beanie, but sticking Star Wars in there. And corrugated rib, I love. But Lucasfilm rejected my design. I had originally done stormtroopers. They wanted clone troopers because they wanted that represented as well. So sometimes we think we have this lineup of all our designs and we're ready to go, but I go through the first pass and kind of weed out what may or may not work, or maybe it's too similar to something else, or that character is already represented enough. And then my editor goes through it again and
gives her opinion.
Yep. And sometimes I have to give something back or I have to take something away. It is a fine balance. And then, so in this case, then Lucasfilm would go and look at it. So in this case, they loved the hat, but they wanted it to be a more specific character. So until really all the projects, until they're photographed, I know the final lineup. Because things can change all the way up to the end.
And you still have the same timeline. So if they suddenly say, no, we don't, we've got enough of that, or we don't want that, we want something else, you've got to madly rush that project into the book.
Well, this is done far enough in advance that if they want something changed, it's not terrible.
Okay. Yeah.
I knit as much of my own things as I can, but I'm also doing the writing. So there's an insane amount of writing that goes in. Each project has a write-up about how the knitting relates to the subject matter and then the construction. Yeah. So sometimes people say, well, why is your name on the cover? You only have X amount of projects. I'm doing all that research and all that writing. And my husband calls me the conductor, conducting the yarn and getting it to the designers and, making this tune and making sure that it all comes together. You're really the producer,
aren't you?
Yeah.
You're making it all. I can see that totally.
It's a lot of work, but again, it comes together and then you see that beautiful puzzle finished.
So this is a spontaneous question. Are you actually working on a new book right now?
I am, yep. And I could tell you, but I'd have to take you back to the US with me.
That's exciting. Cool. So that's still ongoing for you.
Yeah, books take about 2 years.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I'll do 2 at once. But this time I'm just doing 1, taking a little break.
Good. Okay, now Tanis is teaching 5 workshops during the Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival, which is starting today. So can you just give us a summary of what the participants are going to be learning in your workshops and then just demonstrate a couple of the techniques?
So I'll be teaching 5 classes at the PEI Fibre Fest, all somehow related to colorwork, my favorite thing. My favorite, of course, is stranded colorwork. So for this one, it is a hat or a cowl. It's knitter's choice, which I really like to do because not everyone wears cowls and not everyone wears hats, but you do have a head and you have a neck. So hopefully something will work with you. And it's kind of beginner level, but I teach it so much and I know so many tips and tricks that I hear a lot, even though I already knew how to do this. now I've learned all these extra things to make it easier, more fun, and I feel like I can knit anything. And that's always the goal. I want people to leave really excited and ready to take on the colorwork world. Another one is mosaic knitting. And these are knit flat and then seamed up. They're just little fingerless mitts. They're the bow tie pasta mitts because they look like those little bow tie noodles. And then 2-color cabling is one of my favorite things to do. Cables are beautiful, but let's add another color. So
that's great. It's beautiful.
It's so nice and squishy. And it has a lot of similar techniques to stranded colorwork. And we learn a lot in this one. This is probably the most bang for your buck. We learn provisional cast on, 2-color cabling. I show how to cable without a cable needle, chart reading, like hiding your vegetables, and I show some stranded colorwork techniques, and we do some 2-color grafting. So there's a lot that you can learn in this one. It's a great class.
Okay, that's good. And that's a beautiful, beautiful squishy
so squishy,
isn't it?
And then Estonian inlay is a lesser known technique. It's sort of like an easygoing cousin of intarsia and stranded colorwork, and it just came here for a little party. And I always like to add it. I figure you should at least learn 4 things in a new class. So we do the twisted ribbing, and we also do the 2-color Estonian or Vickel braids, and we do chart reading. So this is a great introduction. It's just a little hint without committing to a sweater or a pair of socks. It's a traditional Estonian technique. And it's part of their national costume. And they have the most beautiful national costumes. So it's nice to kind of make this a more well-known technique.
Is this done afterwards?
No, it's done as you go.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's
and
have
so
a look at the inside.
It's a little bit like intarsia because it's one isolated thing without the stranding around of colorwork. But the only thing I don't like in knitting, I'm just not a big fan of intarsia. We have a truce, we're frenemies, we're okay, but it's not my favorite thing. So this is kind of a way to avoid it, and it's a beautiful technique.
And it's kind of the floats on the wrong side, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that essentially what it is? I've never done that technique.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, except it's isolated, and then when it's in the round, it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
So it's just a really fun class to teach because it's a lesser known technique.
Okay, great.
And then the last one is steeking, which I love steeking, and it's not just for cardigans. So I teach it 4 ways. And here's an example of something that is steeked. It is a blanket. It's another DAR contest winner for the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. So I show it with a crochet hook. There's a sewing method with hand sewing on a sewing machine, and then needle felting. So there's lots of different ways.
Needle felting sounds great. So we've got to see that.
Yes.
I've never seen that.
So for steeking, we are working on 4 different swatches, and it's really important to set up your swatch properly. So regardless of the technique you're doing, I like to kind of set almost like guardrails of the section that you'll be steeking. So as you know, steeking is not something you do on the fly. You need to build in a little extra fabric into your project because you will eventually be cutting down the middle. So whether we're working on the sewing machine or a crochet hook or a back stitch, the needle felting method is great if you're using a 100% protein fiber. So you need straight up wool to do it. And whether you felt it on purpose or by accident, which, we've all probably done both, it's a little bit similar to that in that we are just felting the section. So I'm not even setting up guardrails for this. I could if I wanted to, but this is just a 100% single ply wool. Yeah. And then it's on top of, it looks like a little scrub brush, but it is for needle felting. And then it has this little tool, and you want to be careful with it because it's got needles on there.
Yeah.
So you're essentially going to stab in the area. In this case, it's a 5-stitch wide steek. Yeah. Same with on this. And you just do that till it feels about right.
Okay.
And then when you look at the wrong side,
it's going to look fluffy. Yeah, and then that's right.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy.
See how fuzzy that is?
Yeah.
So when I go to cut that, it will not go anywhere because it's been felted in there. And then some of the traditional Shetland knitters will just call it a day and let your body heat and sweat kind of felt the fringy things down. So
so after the needle felting, you don't need to do anything. You just leave it.
You can cut it, and I'm a little too type A for that. I would still pick up my stitches, do a nice finishing, and put like a nice grosgrain ribbon or something on there. But if you have done it properly and you are using 100% wool, it will stay there.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, what's next?
Next, I'm going to show you 2-color Vickel braids. So 2-color Estonian or Vickel braids are a really nice way to add a little bit of color or some texture to your project. Yeah. So they're kind of a one and done. So they're different from Latvian braids, which I've got done here on the bottom, because that takes place over 3 rounds. Okay. And I can make them point, in this case, they're pointing to the right, or I can make them point to the left. Mm-hmm. And I love Latvian braids. I use them all the time. But these Estonian braids, they only go in one direction, and you can use 1, 2, 3 colors, however many you want. But it's just a nice way to break up a pattern.
Definitely. And it's quite delicate. It's not sticking out so much.
Yeah, it's subtle. It's more subtle than its friend Latvian braid. So here it's a nice pattern break between the twisted rib brim and getting into the Estonian portion. Yeah. So I like to do it with 2 colors because, again, any way I can squeeze in another color, let's do it. So for this type of braid, I always want to look at what color stitch is at the beginning of my left hand needle. So in this case, it's pink. And there's a little bit of acrobatics involved with this. So I'm going to knit into the back of the second stitch with my opposite color of what's on there. Yeah. So in my case, the white. And I'm going to take it off, but not slide it off the needle. Uh-huh. Then I'm going to knit into the front of the first stitch with the other color.
Okay.
And this is tricky. This is going to slide off, and then I'm going to move this over here. Uh-huh. So I'll show you one more time. That's the easiest step and also the easiest to forget and the most important. Okay, so pink is on my needle here. I know I'm going to be knitting through the back of the second stitch with my pink. Not pulling anything off. Knitting through the front of the first stitch with my white. That is going to slide off as well as its clinger. Scooch that back over. So I can do this 1 by 1. I can do it 2 by 2. I could do it 1, 2, 3. I can do infinite colors that I want. And it just makes this really pretty braid that will kind of nestle right under your needle.
That's great. Okay, and it doesn't matter how you keep your yarns at the back. Not one colour has to always go over the other.
You don't have to worry about dominance. I mean, if you know about it, it will mean that your yarns won't tangle. Yeah. But it being just a one and done kind of thing, if you have to untangle your yarns for 1 round, it's not too bad.
That's great. And what's it called again?
It's an Estonian braid, sometimes called a Vickel braid, Vikkle, which is an Estonian word for braid.
Ah, okay. That's a cool technique.
Yeah, it's really pretty. All right, so 2-color grafting is a great way to end a project like this. So I challenge you to find the beginning and the end of that. And if it's done properly, you really can't. So we've all done Kitchener stitch, whether it, finishing a sock, or sometimes you see it on shoulder seams. And it is actually named after Lord Kitchener, who led armies all over the world. And his soldiers were getting sick and getting gangrene because they were marching, 20, 30 miles a day, and their toes were rubbing up against the sock seam. So he gets credit for it, but again, I think it was a woman who probably invented it because we're very clever. All that rubbing up against, they had to find a way to make a seamless sock toe. So that's how Kitchener stitch came to be.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah. And like the Earl of Cardigan.
That? Yeah.
Well, again, I love research.
Yeah.
So anytime I learn about a new technique or I'm going to teach it, I want to learn why is it called that.
Yeah.
So for this, to get a nice seamless join, because this is knit in a very long tube, so there's no wrong side that is visible, you have to find a way to join it.
Yeah.
So you couldn't even 3-needle bind off because you would have that seam on the outside. So 2-color grafting is a great way to seamlessly join these 2 edges. So if this was a big long tube, I would be getting ready to finish up. I wouldn't bind off. I would be 2-color grafting them. So the key, this is a little bit different than regular grafting because I'm going to be working with 2 colors. Mm-hmm. And one little hint that I find to save you so much brain power and time is because I've got 2 ends to work with, put a tapestry needle on both ends. And so you're not sitting there constantly taking off the tapestry needle.
Oh, totally.
And, when you are grafting, you kind of get into that zone. Mm-hmm. And I chant as I do it. And I try to do it when no small humans are awake.
Yes.
It is not
on, pearl off, knit on, pearl off.
It is not an easy technique to just pick up where you left off. So we start by following our color sequence. So in my case, the green stitches are at the beginning. And we know that when we start grafting, we start it a little bit different than we do the rest of the technique. So we go in as if to purl, and then in as if to knit, and that's our setup. And now we start the chanting. So we will go in as if to knit. And it can be a little tricky because we've got 2 strands, and drop that off, in as if to purl, and leave it. And then the back needle, in as if to purl, drop, in as if to knit, and leave it. So that's all well and good. That's all everything that we're used to doing. But now we're going to be introducing another color, and it's going to be split. So grafting is, done in sets of 2 on the front, 2 on the back. So we'll go in as if to purl with the green. And then I'm going to be picking up my purple, and I want to be careful not to pull it over because then I'm going to get horizontal lines. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that it's kind of coming from underneath and out of the way. Yeah. There's a lot of strands happening here.
Yeah.
So then I'll go in as if to purl and then leave it. So then the back one is in as if to purl, drop it off, in as if to knit, and leave it.
Very good. And I can see you've gone underneath the needle again to make sure that you're not going to get strands over the top.
But if you do, it's pretty easy. So I'll do that on purpose to show you that it is not an end-all thing. So now every other one will be a little bit easier because it's just the solid color. Mm-hmm. So knit, drop, purl, drop, knit. Then we're in knit, drop, purl. But for the purl this time, so if I grabbed my green and went over the top.
Yeah, you'd have this strand.
Yeah, and you'd notice right away. So because it's handy that it's on a tapestry needle, you can just kind of scoot it underneath there and get it out of your way. So it is not a big deal if you left it behind. You can just tuck it underneath. And then this one again would be purl, drop, and then knit. So you're following the color sequence that you have already set on your needles. So regardless of if this is 2x2, 3x2, whatever, you just follow the sequences set. So it's not any more complicated than regular grafting. You just need to pay a little more attention to your colors.
Yeah.
So, and it is a great way. You cannot find the beginning or the end of this. It really, it continues that illusion of it just being this infinity loop of beautiful color.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, well, lucky students. I think they're going to have a great time.
I hope so.
Now, you have done so much teaching experience. You've been on knitting television, you've led crafting and knitting workshops, published several knitting books, and also collaborated with Craftsy to create online classes. So with all of that experience, what do you think makes a good teacher, and how do you think the demands on teachers have changed over the years?
I think patience is key, and having 2 small children, that comes in abundance, but not everybody is the same. So meeting a student where they are and encouraging them, the best thing is to see a student leave with a smile on their face, and you see that light bulb moment and they get it, and that is so satisfying. So meeting them where they are, encouragement, taking the time. I always say if I have to demo something 10 times and you need to see it another 10, that is why I am here. I'm here to help you. There's no embarrassment in my classes. There's no wrong. So being encouraging and then reminding them that it's just sticks and string.
Yes.
And it should be fun. So sometimes you need to put it in time out and take a lap, and that's fine. But, come back to it and remember that you're in control as the knitter. Don't let the knitting control you.
Yeah.
So
very good
definitely
advice.
Patience.
And over time, the whole teaching world has changed a lot, hasn't it? I always think back of my grandmother, who she took every available crafting class that was on offer in her area, but there was still back then very limited books, and a lot of it was self-taught. But now we've got the internet and...
Yeah, and I learned the same way as your grandmother. There was no online community. There was no Ravelry. We did not even have a local yarn shop. And, there certainly wasn't internet tutorials. And book tutorials are tough because, they're still images. So I learned mostly by making mistakes and learning on my own. So I think the online community is very helpful in that we can take a class with a teacher around the world and in the comfort of our home in our pajamas, versus, I don't remember how to 2-color graft, so let me go check on YouTube or something.
I do that often. I forget.
Yeah, there's so many things to remember.
I've made myself, I had to go back and have a look. Now, what did I do there?
And then you could compliment yourself on a well-done tutorial, right?
But like you said, I think the main thing is to think that mistakes are good. You'll learn through mistakes, and don't be frightened of them.
I've made more mistakes than I've knit, and it has done nothing but make me a better teacher, knitter, human. We all make mistakes.
Totally. Well, it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to have you on Fruity
Thank
Knitting.
you.
So thank you so much.
Thanks. I had a great time.
Good. Let's say goodbye to the audience.
Bye everyone.